Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world. There's one very interesting observation that I have to make, and we'll talk about this. And that is that whenever you see Eskom being talked about on SABC, Anchor, or anything like that, and they need an expert in there to tell them what's happening with Eskom, guess who they get in? A white fella, Ted Blom. Now, who do they appoint as CEO of Eskom? Yeah, a politically correct BEE fella. Very, very strange considering what a terrible state Eskom is in, and we'll have a look at that in a second. But first, Jabu Mabuza has been appointed Eskom acting CEO and Eskom interim chairman, Public Enterprise Minister Pravin Gordhan announced on Monday. Mabuza's appointment comes as Fakamane Hadebe prepares to leave the embattled power utility at the end of July, having announced his resignation as CEO back in May. Hadebe cited health reasons for his departure. Gordhan in a statement said, "I have informed the Eskom annual general meeting this afternoon, Monday, of my decision to appoint Mabuza as the interim executive chairman for Eskom and acting CEO of Eskom Holdings. Mabuza will assume the duty as acting group Chief Executive Officer, or GCEO, for Eskom due to the resignation of Hadebe, who leaves Eskom on the 31st of July 2019. Within the 3-month period during which Mabuza will be the executive chairman and acting CEO, the Eskom board will conclude the process of identifying a suitable candidate to become the next Eskom GCEO. Now, I can tell you who a perfect candidate would be. It's staring you in the face. Just go and watch TV. Ted Blom. But no. He's got the wrong skin color, guys. So, it's not going to happen. And while all this is going on, foreigners are selling billions of rands, billions and billions of rands, as the woes at Eskom get even worse. Foreigners are ditching South African assets at the fastest pace on record, as concerns mounts that the government will lose its last investment grade rating. And that's thanks to Moody's, who just kind of holding the rand out of the water. Because when they make it junk, it's going to sink like a stone. Overseas investors have sold a net $4.8 billion of South African equities and bonds in just this year alone. The most on a year-to-year date basis in data going back to 1998, according to data compiled by Bloomberg. Outflows, particularly from fixed income securities, have accelerated since the start of June as rating companies and banks turn more bearish on South Africa's fiscal outlook. Now, let's have a look at that chart of those outflows. The rand weakened 2.5% against the dollar last week, its worst performance since February, after Moody's Investor Services warned that the government's plan to double financial support for state power firm Eskom was credit negative. Moody's is the only major ratings company that still grades South African debt higher than junk. Fitch Ratings followed on Friday by cutting its outlook for Africa's most industrialized economy to negative. JP Morgan Chase & Co. said the same day that a rally in the rand since the start of June was more to do with a supportive global environment than improvements in conditions locally. We now believe levels are stretched enough to enter outright rand shorts, JP Morgan analysts, including a London-based and Zenka Kristovova and Robert Habib in New York, said in a note. South Africa's fundamental picture remains very challenging, with a ballooning fiscal deficit and structurally low growth. Despite the outflows, demand among investors is helping to prop up South African assets. The country's main stock index has risen almost 11% in dollar terms this year, compared with the MSCI or Emerging Market Index's 8.2% gain. And while local bonds have been sold off in the past week, they still have handed investors a dollar return of 7.4% in 2019. But when you look at the number of businesses shutting down in South Africa, that trend is not going to continue. And just getting back to Eskom, which is the financial elephant in the room. I mean, Eskom is just... And here they're putting in this Mabuza guy. He's probably related to David Mabuza, who's the deputy president of the ANC, but I can't say that for sure. But the name is the same. Eskom, which supplies about 95% of South Africa's power and is reliant on government bailouts to remain solvent, is set to announce its second consecutive multi-billion rand annual loss on Tuesday. The big question is, how many billions will that be? The state-owned utility forecast in January that its loss would widen to about 20 billion rand in the year through March, from 2.3 billion rand the year before. But Anton Eberhard, who sits on a government team that's advising on a rescue plan for Eskom, told a conference in Lisbon last month the shortfall would be at least 25 billion rand. That's friggin' huge. 25 billion rand. That's $2.5 billion US dollars, or about $2 billion US dollars. Whichever way you look at it, it's not good. Either way, the loss would be a record for a state company, eclipsing the 14.6 billion rand state oil and gas company Petro SA burned through in the year through March 2015, after a massive asset write-down. The utility's precarious financial state has now become a national problem. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni recently announced that Eskom would get a further 59 billion rand over 2 years. Eskom's debt is approaching 500 billion rand. That's a huge percentage of South Africa's GDP. It's incredible. In April this year, Mboweni invoked Section 16 of the Public Finance Management Act, which allowed him to authorize Rand 17.65 billion to Eskom to help it meet its debt obligations. The 17.65 billion rand is part of the 23 billion rand allocated to Eskom in the national budget earlier this year. Eskom has been struggling to produce enough power to meet demand from its aging coal-fired plants, and 2 new ones currently under construction are running years behind schedule and way over budget. The utility isn't generating enough cash to service both its interest and debt repayments, despite having secured tariff increases of more than 500% since 2007, according to Eberhard, a professor at the University of Cape Town. The utility may also get a new chief restructuring officer who will help reorganize its debt and oversee the process of splitting it into generation, transmission, and distribution units. Eskom revealed in May that it owed 440 billion rand as at the end of March, 273 billion rand of which was government guaranteed. Public Enterprises Minister Pravin Gordhan announced on Monday that Jabu Mabuza would serve as the interim executive chair for Eskom. Now, whichever way you look at it, Eskom is dragging the country right down. And what you need is a competent CEO. And I know the guy, you can see him on TV. He's always there, Ted Blom. But as I said, colour of his skin is wrong. Talking about Eskom and its impact on the economy, if Moody's, for example, downgrades the rand to junk, the 5 big areas where the impacts will be on the population in South Africa are increase in food prices. The exchange rate against the dollar is likely to weaken, resulting in an increase in the price of important goods and services. The cost of transport rises, and manufacturers pass their increased costs onto the consumer, putting further pressure on our household finances. Increase in interest rates. If you've got a loan, a bank loan, with the weak rand, we could see interest rates increases, which has a direct impact on debt repayments, home loans, credit cards, personal and car loans. This will affect your ability to service your debt and still be able to afford basic daily expenses, because it will leave very little for you to be able to pay for essentials and still save. Less money for social grants. Now, this is a huge elephant in the room, because A huge percentage of the African population are depending on social grants. A credit downgrade is critical for the country's ability to borrow from foreign investors. Because the lower the credit rating, the higher the interest rate, they will need to pay to the lenders for the amounts borrowed. Higher payments towards debt will leave South Africa with less money for services such as healthcare and social grants. And with healthcare, they want to mess it around with this national health insurance scheme, which is just an absolute crazy L factor missing. That's all I can say about that. What are the other impacts of a rand that goes into junk? A lower job security and unemployment. This kind of pressure could affect corporate companies. Many people have already been retrenched, and salary increases and bonuses in the future are tenuous. Retrenchments also mean that government is unable to collect taxes, their main income stream. You can see the perfect storm, can't you? And the other major change that will happen when the rand is put into junk, South Africans are inclined to react emotionally to the change to junk status. However, Ngali suggests that by understanding the implications and planning accordingly, people can ensure their financial well-being. But there will be a need for tighter budget control. Take a good look into your finances and start with your budget, Ngali said. You will need to ensure that you adjust your budget and also stick to it. Live within your means. A good budget is useless without the discipline to follow it. Look for alternative ways to reduce your spending and be creative about it, to ensure that you can still enjoy your life. If you like spending time with friends, consider rather doing this at home. To plan ahead, Ngali says it's important to stay invested and stick to your long-term investment plans. Now, talking about that, in the next, probably not this Sunday, but next Sunday, I'm going to be talking to a couple of people who have got some fantastic ideas about investment, and I'll talk more about this later. So in about not this Sunday, next Sunday. If you can increase your short-term savings in order to take advantage of the high interest rates and also to use when the going starts to get even tougher, diversify your investments, invest in different investment buckets, asset classes to buffer any risk which may affect certain areas of your portfolio. Avoid taking on further debt, as it may be difficult to pay off debt. Taking on more will only make things even more difficult. It is very important that you maintain your financial well-being, ensuring that you are financially healthy and secure. And Ngali said, you can achieve financial well-being by setting goals, managing your budget and your debt, setting goals and saving towards those objectives. Now, wouldn't it be nice if the state-owned enterprises followed those guidelines? It's crash and burn, corruption and incompetence, and it's the same old story happening at Eskom, which is the biggest entity taking down South Africa economically. All right, guys, please remember to subscribe to be kept informed, ring the bell for updates, and have a great evening.